Welcome to the Chaos Chronicles, where parenting, humor, and the hard truths of foster care, adoption, and big behaviors collide. Hi, I'm Stacy Hickey. I'm mom of 6. I've been a foster parent to 17 children, and I'm the adoptive mom of my 2 youngest daughters. With years of experience as a child abuse detective turned school counselor, I'm here to offer real talk, expert advice, and plenty of laughs. If you're navigating the chaos of parenting, whether you're a foster or adoptive parent, a special needs parent, or just trying to make sense of the wild ride of family life, this podcast is for you. Each episode delivers practical tips, heartwarming stories, and a dose of comedy to help you embrace the beautiful chaos of your journey. Let's normalize the struggles of parenting children with big behaviors, ADHD, autism, and trauma, and create a space where you never have to walk this path alone. Laugh, learn, and lean into the chaos together. Subscribe now to stay updated on all new episodes. Can you think of a time when your kid did something that you disapproved of, or that stressed you out or caused you major anxiety, and you felt inclined to lecture them about their choices and the repercussions of those choices? But after you lectured them, you are 100% sure that they didn't really hear you or understand how important your lecture was. So, you went back to lecture or nag them some more. Maybe you changed up your wording, maybe you changed up your tone, but nagging nonetheless. And to your frustration, they responded the exact same way they did the first time you sat down to lecture them. They completely tuned out. Do you feel inclined to lecture your kids? Do you have a hard time stopping yourself? Do you feel like a pushover if you don't? Hi, my name is Stacy Hickey, and I'm a lecturer. After all, the first step is acknowledgement, right? I am the queen of nagging. You can ask any one of my children. Lecturing, nagging, I'm quite sure our kids would use all of those words interchangeably. I could seriously put you to shame with my amazing nagging skills. And guess what? Every time I go to my kids to lecture or nag them about a situation, how they should have done this or how they could have done that, they all have the gall to tune me out. And sometimes they just rebel altogether and respond in the complete opposite way in which I'm trying to get them to see or understand. It is frustrating, to say the least. After all, we are the ones with the life experience. We have been there, we have done that, and we have learned so much throughout the years. So how dare they tune out our information and not accept it and embrace it and change their ways? After all, we don't want our kids to experience the things that we went through, and we always come from a place of love and oftentimes fear. But we need to stop talking at our kids because, well, they immediately shut down and stop listening. We all go into these conversations hoping our kids will finally get it and change their behavior, right? So if we stop lecturing, how in the world will we get our point across when we have a moody teen or a strong-willed child? Let's talk today about how we can stop nagging and lecturing so our kids will actually listen to us and take responsibility for their own behaviors. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that change is hard. I am over here right now giving you all a huge round of applause for even considering learning a different way to do things. Changing our habits and routines is not easy, but when you're raising a strong-willed child, you just can't parent in the same way you parented your other children. So yay for you for even being willing to try something different. When we lecture and talk at our kids, this just agitates them and makes them even more angry. It shuts them down and makes them less receptive to the wisdom that we are trying to impart on them. In turn, this can breed resentment within your kids and within yourself. You don't feel like you're being heard, and they are tired of being talked at, and they choose to shut down. At the end of the day, you go through all of those steps of lecturing and nagging, and it doesn't even work. You're both left feeling frustrated and oftentimes hurt. So why can't we stop ourselves? We know that our kids aren't really listening. Why do we feel the need to go in again and again and again? I know for myself, I feel like I have a really important message or point that I want to make. And maybe if they hear it just one more time or in one different context, maybe it'll finally click in their heads. I just wanted to click so badly for them. Last year, my 20-year-old son was just in a weird place. He had always been a homebody. He wasn't into partying or really going out much. Well, he decided that it was time to experience life to its fullest. He was hanging out with whom I deemed to be the wrong crowd, spending time in places that weren't the safest, and making choices I didn't love. My anxiety was through the roof. I felt like if I just kept reminding him of the dangers, the risks, the potential repercussions of his choices, he would finally see the light. Everything would finally click and he would start to make different choices. I mean, I was not sleeping. I was on edge. I was so irritable. It was a really hard time for both me and my husband. At least once a day, I was going into my son's room to talk with him, to plead with him, to tell him how irresponsible he was being. Basically, to nag and lecture the crap out of him, hoping and praying that the light bulb would go off and he would see the error of his ways. How did he respond? He chose to completely shut down, stop telling me anything that was going on in his life because I was just too much with all of it. He had to work through that phase in his life on his own. There was nothing that I was going to say to him that was going to drive him to that aha moment. And even if it did, he was so annoyed with me that he would never even admit or acknowledge it. This phase of his life, he just had to figure out on his own. It didn't matter how desperately I wanted to save him from himself or the hurt or the danger. He had to walk through that phase of life to realize that that wasn't the life for him. Now that we've put some distance from that time, it's easier to Monday night quarterback everything and accept that I probably could have and should have handled things very differently. But in that moment of time, my whole being was so consumed with anxiety. I just felt an overwhelming need to get through to this kid in any way possible. When we lecture, it feels like we're being compelled out of anxiety to talk, to impart our message. Like, you need to tell them this information. I really need to tell them because if I don't tell them, this is the kind of anxiety that I'm talking about, and we are all guilty of it. If what you're saying is born of your own parental anxiety, then your kids will sense that and resist it, and your lesson will become nagging versus teaching. When we lecture, we tend to go on, right? The reality is, the fewer words you use, the more confident you sound. When you ramble on, or lecture on and on, it's like you're trying to convince yourself, along with your kid, what you're saying. You're trying to justify your words. And there aren't any strong-willed children, or people in general, who like to hear someone go on and on and on. We naturally just start to tune you out at some point. I don't think you heard me the first 552 times I told you, so I'm going to tell you one more time and say it in a different way. And often we excuse our decision to lecture once more because we just love our kids so darn much and we want what is best for them. Does that sound familiar? Honestly, lecturing is more about you satisfying your own need, your own anxiety, your own desire to talk and prove something. It is often more about your own control issues than it is about ultimately helping your child. But teaching just sounds different, right? Teaching sounds confident. Teaching sounds helpful. You're not entangled with your child and their emotions when you teach. You aren't entangled with feeling compelled to have to get through to them. The expectation becomes different. You are allowing your child to make his or her own choice or choices rather than trying to convince them to do it for you or for some other reason. You can say, hey, this is what I found in life. Things tend to go better for me when I do X, Y, or Z. I could show you a different way to try that in case you want to try it. And then you show them how you would do it, but without a lot of words or expectation that they would immediately do it your way. See, there's a big difference. When lecturing, you're trying to convince them, and you really need them to listen to you, and you need them to do what you want them to do, versus, I am a grown adult. I have been around a while. I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you, and I'm going to trust that you will get this. Teaching tends to be more decisive and non-emotional. It puts the onus or the responsibility on the child taking responsibility. When you're lecturing, you are too emotionally invested in it. You become an equal part of the equation. It's like, I'm doing my part by lecturing you over and over and over again, explaining things, and it's your job to do what I tell you to do. Whereas teaching is modeling. Teaching is dropping wisdom, then stepping back and letting your kids own their choices. You have to relinquish control over how they accomplish certain things, and that is hard. You have to be okay knowing how they decide to accomplish something may very well be different from how you would choose to accomplish it. And that's okay. Give yourself permission to say nothing. Stop feeling the need to fill that space. Give yourself permission to know that it's not your job to fix your kids. It's not your job to fix every situation. Sometimes when we try to fix situations, we escalate them and make it a whole lot worse. It's okay to not try to fix every situation or problem. This will be hard and it might drive you crazy for a while. But watch how your kid responds when you stop trying to be the fixer of all the things. The really cool thing is, when you learn to master this, and you can, you will be teaching your kids how to have constructive discussions and handle conflicts with their future spouse and kids one day, rather than just feeling justified to say stuff because they're the parent or they're the authority figure. You have to control your anxiety over the future. We have to stop projecting into the future and thinking our kids will always be like this. We often start when they're 3 or 4 and in pre-K and they still can't sit, or they're getting in trouble, or they've camped out in their bedrooms for days on end and won't come out and socialize with the family. We're always worrying and projecting into the future, and we have to have more confidence in our children. Changing some of our own expectations and working with and accepting who our children actually are will help a lot. Sometimes we just get overwhelmed, and that leads to lecturing and nagging. When I'm overwhelmed, I nag and rant, and I'm irritable, and my kids want nothing to do with me. This is normal. You are normal. It would be weird if you never got overwhelmed. You are most likely listening to this podcast because you are right alongside me raising a strong-willed child. Overwhelmed is one of our love languages. Literally, as I'm writing this episode, I'm completely stressed out and overwhelmed. Millie has been on one for the last 24 hours. I woke up this morning to her destroying the kitchen, cussing me out, all the things. Trust me, my energy is desperately trying to match her energy in this moment versus being the calm force. It is taking every ounce of me to remove myself from the situation and be able to try to regulate myself. In the moments when you are feeling overwhelmed, turn on some music in the background. Music is an amazing tool to calm and regulate us. Then sit down and start coloring, or pull out a book, or play Play-Doh, or build a puzzle. Create something. Learn how to model the behavior that you would like to see from your child in that moment, but without using a lot of words to add to the chaos. Coloring is really therapeutic and relaxing. This is something you can do with teens as well. As a side note, I also have coloring books in my classroom or my counseling office, and there are more times than I can count that I have sat at a table with a student while we both color and have a deep, meaningful conversation. Coloring is grounding, and it also allows you to feel more comfortable in having hard conversations because they can talk to you without having to look you in the eyes. Remember, energy likes to match energy, so if you are calm and regulated, your child will mirror that. I'm speaking this into myself right now more than anything else. Trust me. Look, your kids are never going to say, "Mom, Dad, I hadn't really thought of that before, but after you lectured me for the 552nd time, that light bulb finally went off and I realized how much wisdom you have." Yeah, that is not happening. Kids need to learn by touching the hot stove and learning for themselves. We lecture from a place of love. We want so badly to help our kids, but lecturing often doesn't sound loving. It sounds like we don't think our kids are capable of being successful. So I'm just going to keep telling you again and again and again that you aren't capable. So inadvertently, that is the message that we end up sharing with our kids. We're trying to explain and re-explain because we feel like our message isn't getting through, but our kids receive this as we don't think they are capable. Think about this instead. Instead of a lot of words and lectures, how can we show and teach kids a different way to handle situations? How do we give kids the tools to succeed? Give them a challenge you know they will be successful at. Create that success, and then pour energy into that, telling them how great their choices were. Let them know how much you love how they handled the situation. Let me introduce you to a little concept I learned about called rewind and replay. Your child walks into the room, takes something from her sister. Instead of a long lecture, "I don't know how many times I've had to tell you, it's not nice to take things from your sister. We share, we ask permission, yada, 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 yada." So your kid isn't really hearing this. But what if you tried this instead? "Hey, that isn't really working, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to rewind and replay. Rewind is having your kids literally walk backwards back out of the room because you're rewinding. And it's just pretty fun for a kid to do. Then they'll walk back into the room and replay. They walk back in, and you can physically show them how to handle the situation, ask them how to ask their sister for that toy or handle things in a different way. You have rewinded, and then you replayed the situation in an acceptable way. You should definitely try rewind and replay. This truly works for all ages. And as parents, we can also rewind and replay. When we find ourselves lecturing too much, you can just tell yourself, you know what, this is about me, not about my kid. This is my anxiety talking. I'm going to rewind and replay. So you walk your rear end back out of the kitchen or wherever it is that you're lecturing, and then walk back into the kitchen. Notice something positive your kid is doing. Affirm them for that. This is modeling, and it's just a really cool thing to do. Also, if you're super edgy and irritable, it's okay to apologize. It's encouraged to apologize. This wasn't about you. This was about me, and I apologize. I know I talk about apologizing a lot, but I think it's such an important skill to use as parents. This models for your child how to handle your own behavior. Another idea, your kid comes to you and shares some friend drama. Instead of responding with the immediate, let me give you lecture number 153 on how to make good friends, instead you say, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Inside, you are dying to lecture, and you have so many things you want to say about friendships and bad decisions, but you aren't going to say those things. What you are going to say is this: I'm going to work on something in the kitchen, the garage, wherever. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I've got some ideas about that if you want to come grab me later. Then you walk away. You have told your child, I hear you, and I have something to say, but I'm going to give you the power over when and how I share that. You put the ball in your child's court instead of running your mouth and dumping all of your thoughts, fears, and anxieties on them. This can be super powerful. Now, they may come in later and say, okay, what are your stupid ideas? Don't be offended. They're seeking you out. They are kids after all. This is your time to shine and drop that wisdom on them. One phrase that might come in handy, hey, I've discovered something in life. It's that when I do X or when people do X, it tends to work out a lot better. And then walk away or change the subject. Then give them space to process what you shared instead of going into a long lecture with all sorts of pressure and expectations. After all, kids will be kids, and that's okay. They're supposed to act this way. This is normal kid behavior. As our kids get older, sometimes we don't know what to say right off the bat. You can tell them that. Listen, I don't know what to say or do right now, and then give them time and space. Too much talking, especially when kids are upset, only makes them more upset. They need action steps, not words. When your kids are doing something wrong, when they're upset, realize this isn't the time to lecture or nag. And don't be surprised that kids are acting like kids. Instead, come alongside and acknowledge them and give them an action plan. Yeah, that stinks for sure. Hey, here's something to think about. Hey, I have found it often works best when I do this. And then you walk away and give them space to process it. The only real time you should be talking a lot is if your kids ask you questions. But even then, start out short and sweet. Make sure you're in a two-way discussion that isn't driven by your anxiety or your agenda. By all means, talk if your child is seeking out a conversation with you. But make sure you are teaching or simply listening and not lecturing. One way to tell if you're lecturing versus teaching is if you feel like you have an agenda or if you're extremely emotionally invested. If you feel that way, you might want to take a step back, rewind, and replay. Okay, we have talked about a lot. This podcast is as much for my benefit as it is for yours. I really appreciate that you're open to trying something different. Raising strong-willed children is not for the faint of heart. We need to continue to fill up our toolboxes because what traditionally works for the neurotypical kid does not work for our kids. Our kids aren't broken. We don't need to fix them. They just view the world differently, and the sooner we can accept that, the sooner we can shift our parenting style to meet their needs. We really need to work on rewiring our own brains to become the best version of ourselves for our children. I absolutely love that we are all in this together. I sure hope that you find some of my ramblings helpful. If you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas on topics to discuss, please leave a comment or reach out to me on Instagram at Life with the Hickeys or on Facebook at Stacy Hickey. As always, it has been such a pleasure. So much love to you and yours. Until next time, have a good one.